Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, the Friday podcast about your Kindle, books, and all things Amazon. I'm Len Edgerly. Today is Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, 2018. Welcome from chilly Maine, Ocean Park, where Darlene and I are making an overnight visit, which will probably feature reading on our Kindles by a fire in the living room fireplace later tonight. That, to my mind, is the definition of cozy living. My guest this week, the Dallas writer David Hopkins, was surprised to find how cozy and experienced reading on an e-reader could be when he switched from paper a couple of years ago.
Reading on a e-reader felt like reading. It was still this sort of cuddly, warm, meditative, reflective experience.
David caught my eye this week with an essay at medium.com with a Mark Twain-esque takedown of the long-running Friends sitcom, which he blames for the decline of Western civilization. I hope you'll enjoy our conversation. I'm also going to finish up the Ask Me Anything questions which you emailed to me for last week's show, which I really enjoyed putting together. You will find links in the show notes by way of news to a couple of noteworthy stories this week. One which quotes a leading investor's prediction that Amazon will offer a Prime Health service for medical and health products. That would certainly be interesting. And the other reports that for the second year in a row, Amazon was selected as the company brand that Americans love the most. The ranking came from a technology company named Morning Consult based in New York City. You may remember that I had planned to speak this week with Tom Abrahams, an author who is from Houston. Turns out he also works as a TV anchor from Houston, so he was sent to cover the George H.W. Bush funeral in Washington, D.C. So I have him scheduled for next week, so we'll hear from him. He's written a really strong book that I'm enjoying reading titled Home. It's part of a series. As I was looking around for someone to talk to this week, I came across this essay on Medium by David Hopkins. It's titled How a TV Sitcom Triggered the Downfall of Western Civilization. It was first published in 2016. Within a couple of hours of reading this on my computer, David and I were connected by Skype between Cambridge, Mass. And Dallas to talk about it. I knew from the bio notes to the essay that he is the author of a short story collection and a prolific writer. I began the interview by asking him to fill in some more details about his career so far.
Well, I've always been a writer, mostly in the world of fiction. I was a comic book writer for about 10 years, some different graphic novels in a variety of genres. From there, I kind of made the jump to magazines, writing a lot for D Magazine, features, and that was really where I kind of cut my teeth as a journalist, interviewing people, learning about different subjects. And from there, I began to kind of dip my toe into op-ed writing, like a lot of us in this generation, blogging in particular, and then through Medium, I've really enjoyed that platform, and then also self-publishing as well, which has turned out to be really valuable for me. And then during all that time while I've been writing, I did freelance for a while as a writer full-time, but then I hopped over to do marketing. And so I've done copywriting, strategy work, been a marketing director at some various companies.
And you were also a teacher?
I was a teacher for 12 years. So a lot of these things overlap. I started off as a teacher in 2000, from 2000 to 2012. I was teaching high school English and creative writing.
Was that after the Friends series ended, or where was Friends in that time that you were teaching the high school students?
Friends was still pretty popular around the time I first started teaching, because I think that Friends ended around 2004, and I started teaching from 2000 to 2004. And of course, that was towards the end where it became, very much sort of the national conversation. I mean, we don't think about it nowadays. Nowadays, talking about the TV shows you like is kind of a shortcut to easy conversation between friends. I mean, all of a sudden people are like, all right, what are you watching on Netflix or HBO or that? And you can have an easy hour-long conversation. It's a little bit of a pet peeve to me that I go to parties, talk with my friends, and instead of discussing politics, philosophy, all the things you're not supposed to talk about. We end up spending the whole time talking about the next season of Game of Thrones. And it's the same conversation over and over again. But people forget that back in the early 2000s, we didn't have any of these shows. And Friends was really, I know that there were better shows out there at the time, but Friends was kind of a national conversation. It would come out on Thursday nights, and then on Friday, people would talk about what happened in that episode. And that was not something that we did really with any other TV show at that time.
Well, I didn't watch it, I think, when it was airing, but I have gone back and I've started binge watching it right from season 1. I think I'm up to about season 4, and it's a place I go to turn my mind off.
Oh, absolutely.
I just enjoy, they're all handsome, beautiful people. That's laughter. And when I read your essay today about the sort of darker take on Friends, I wondered if the very reason that you highlight is why I find it such a calming place to hide out in the middle of a day when my mind is just kind of fried.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I have found that when people have critiqued my essay, they'll go after sort of this, this over-the-top, hyperbolic stance that I take. And it is much like Mark Twain. It's bombastic for rhetorical reasons. But I find that people who disagree with me, they're not wrong when they say, come on, man, it's just a TV show. It's lighthearted. You can turn your brain off for a while. And I agree with all of that. But then I also think that the character of Ross, who is supposed to be emblematic of the intellectual, whether he was or wasn't, remains to be seen. But he certainly represented that. And the go-to joke with that was always, you're boring us, shut up, no one wants to hear about it. It's the eye roll. And so when I was watching it, because I also started binge watching it again, I missed the first time I saw it just how ubiquitous that joke was throughout the series of no one wants to hear about what you have to say. And of course, Ross goes crazy throughout the course of that series. And much credit to David Schwimmer for really kind of playing that up over the seasons. But, in my own head, I'm thinking, clearly if you're around friends who keep telling you that nothing that you say is interesting, at a certain point you're going to snap. And and then I put myself to say, well, are intellectuals in America going through a similar situation where they're trying to talk about things that they've invested years of their life into, and people are like, can you explain it to me like I'm a 2-year-old? It's like, no, I can't.
And it could drive you crazy if that's the response that you're getting. Oh, absolutely. Kind of from the zeitgeist, that you think that the things that you're interested in are boring or worse. This could be threatening to, especially, I think of myself in this group of intellectual whatever, but also a little sensitive that if what I care about is treated this way, I don't know. It's hard to just blow it off.
Well, and I was listening to Pod Save America last week, and they were talking with a climate change advocate. And, one of the conversations they were having is, our conversations are about how to have conversations about climate change. And we can't get any further with this issue because we're still talking about how to talk about it. And as long as the scientists and the advocates are trying to figure out how can I possibly intellectually convince people to take action, we're not actually taking any action. And I think that that's what we're having happen in culture across many fields, is we're spending so much time trying to say, okay, if I can just convince them that my ideas are correct, then they will be obligated to take action. But when you are in a post-intellectual society, a convincing argument doesn't matter because people just intrinsically say, well, I don't feel like your truth is accurate. So we have evidence for things like the value of vaccines. But people can always say, well, but I knew somebody who had this happen. And then all of a sudden, we can't actually motivate any change. And so I don't know what the answer is to get past that, except that at some level we've got to elevate the role of the expert, of the person who has spent time on these issues. And this isn't a liberal conversation. This isn't a conservative conversation. I think we have to be open on all sides to people who are experts in their field and to really listen to what they have to say. And I don't know if we're doing that nowadays, but it is something that I hope we're able to move back to.
When I think of the cast of Friends, and your description of them in the essay was spot on, if you had to be stranded, I assume with Ross would be the most interesting person to be stranded on an island with, but what if you had to pick one of the others, who would you pick as kind of the least difficult to spend a long time with?
That's an interesting question, because I actually do think I would probably enjoy hanging out with Ross. We might have fun having a variety of conversations. I actually think, though, and she is in many ways the anti-Ross, but I think I might go with Phoebe as well.
Describe her character in that sense.
Well, I think whereas Ross is definitely, I mean, he's the head, but he definitely is also an impulsive individual. Phoebe, in many ways, seems to be the person who is trying to think of the best way to describe it. She is definitely the person who is most open to the world being a mysterious and magical place. And if I was stranded, I might need some of that optimism. There's a great episode early in the series where Phoebe and Ross are debating evolution. And the thing that is really great about it is obviously Phoebe is hard to convince. But the interesting thing is that she's actually wanting to have this conversation, whereas I don't think the other friends would care one way or another.
Yeah.
Phoebe at least wants to engage him, even if it is just to annoy him a little bit. And so, I think I'd probably go Ross or Phoebe if I was on the desert island.
Good choice. I think I heard a TED Talk, or you were talking about Ben Franklin and wearing his crazy hat to Paris and sort of the symbolism of all of that. But why do you consider the myth that we have around Ben Franklin to be problematic in this setting?
In this particular instance, and when I did that TED Talk, I used the example of my friend Wim. Wim is the president of Lakewood Brewing Company. It's a craft brewery here in Dallas, Texas. And there's this idea that people are just sort of naturally gifted into something. And I use the example of my friend Wim because Wim worked in marketing for many years, but before he opened his own brewery, he spent, the proverbial 10,000 hours perfecting his craft. A lot of mistakes. I was there watching him in the garage making batch after batch after batch to try and make the perfect beer. And Wim is very, very particular. He wants to get it just right. And if it's not right, he's going to throw it out, try again, try again, try again. And I think that what people, when they look at Ben Franklin, they see a guy who, quote unquote, never went to school. He was a self-educated, self-taught man who went off and did great things. And I think sometimes we forget the part of he was self-educated. That meant that he was still educating himself. And I think sometimes we look at this idea of all of these amazing billionaires who never went to school or dropped out of school, and there's something about that allure of he spurned traditional education and then went on to found Microsoft or whatever it is, or he never went to school and now he's Albert Einstein. And I think that what we have to look at is that these people in many ways are the exception that proves the rule, that education is vital, that training, that spending those hours upon hours to perfect our craft. So I worry that the myth of Franklin sometimes makes us also be a little bit skeptical of education itself, which obviously as a teacher is still very important to me. As a teacher, I had many kids that dropped out while I was teaching, and I tried so hard to keep them at school. But a lot of them were really motivated. I mean, they wouldn't articulate it this way, but they're motivated by the myth of Ben Franklin, this idea that there was something better for them after school that they had to pursue. And the fact is none of them had that experience. They all had a really difficult time after they dropped out. People like hearing that story, and they go, and then one of them went on to become the CEO of a great company. It's like, no, that did not happen at all.
Yeah, that happened to Bill Gates and a few others, and they sort of keep the myth alive.
Exactly. And Bill Gates,
Yeah.
I would say, and them, they are sort of the next generation of the Ben Franklin myth.
Yeah, it's just without the hat. You talk about some tips for retaining our sanity in a dumb world, and one is to read books, which, of course, is something that people that listen to this show are all for. And I've had a guy that on the show several times, James McQuivey, that makes the point that the Kindle technology, which I've been following pretty closely, is really perfect for people who read lots of books, a book a month. And for someone who reads just one book a year, it's just not worth learning how to change the font size and all the stuff in the Kindle. But so having read your essay, I was trying out my hypothesis that I bet this guy is reading on a Kindle, and
I am.
You confirmed that in a message to me. But tell me about your adoption of the Kindle, what you use, what your reading is like. Do you read real books? What's your reading technology like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I started with the Kobo probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and I did not think that I would like it, but I kind of just tried it because I had sort of this traditionalist view that I wanted to hold the paper book and feel the turning of the page. And what was funny is I was absolutely wrong in my assumptions. Reading on a e-reader felt like reading. It was still this sort of cuddly, warm, meditative, reflective experience that I could sit and read for hours on it, and it was, if anything, it fit in my jacket pocket and I could take it with me, and I found that I was reading more when I had my digital reader. Now the Kobo eventually, I didn't like it. It was a little too slow, a little sluggish. It was kind of buggy, but I did switch about, I guess, a year ago over to the Kindle, and that's been I know the podcast is about Kindle, or is really, but I really do love my Kindle. I use it every day. I always have it within arm's reach of me, and yeah, I found that for whatever reason, having all of those books available to me has helped me kind of sustain my reading habit in ways that if I just reserve reading for just the hour before I go to bed, it allows me to do more reading during the day, which I've actually really appreciated.
Which model of the Kindle do you have?
Oh gosh, I wish I knew. It's the...
Maybe the Paperwhite?
Yeah, it's that one.
Yeah, the tablet. Yeah, that's a good one.
I really like it.
You've also published. Did you publish your short story collection with Kindle Direct Publishing?
I did.
Tell us about that. It's called We Miss All the Great Stories. It came out in 2015. Tell us how you came to publish that and what your experience of self-publishing with KDP was.
Yeah, it was We Miss All the Great Parties, actually. It was...
oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's actually a reference to my life growing up as a nerd. I always knew that kids were going out partying somewhere. I was just never part of that. But the short story collection, I wrote it as a short story of the month club, where I was sending it out to my friends who had supported me. And then I promised them that once I finished all of them, I would create a collected edition. I found that the Kindle publishing was remarkably easy. I liked using it. I liked having the author bio page. I thought the author bio page was one of the highlights that's not touted nearly enough because that's someplace that I can reliably send people if they want to see the work that I've published and have it out there. I can also put videos on there. The whole thing has worked really well. I think what it requires, though, for writers is to have a good sort of way to reach out to your readers. So I think that in combination with an email newsletter, to have a good list of people to let them know that it's out there, because there's so many books in that marketplace that simply publishing it and hoping people will find it is just not how it works. You really have to, at that point, reach out to the people that are kind of part of your audience and let them know what's out there. In this way, something like medium.com works very well in conjunction with Kindle, Amazon, with digital publishing, because if I publish an excerpt of one of my short stories, at the bottom I can then send them over there, and those two things work really well together for me.
Can you say what kind of an audience you've experienced since 2015 when you first published it, or how many you've sold, or how many you sell in a month?
In a month, I don't know. It's slowed down quite a bit. I think I've sold a few hundred, which for me is not bad. It's a good audience. I have a few thousand on Medium, so with my audience, and so if I can sell a few hundred on Amazon, then the issue only becomes, how many I'm going to publish in a set period of time, because you obviously don't want to write one book and call it a day. That's not a career.
Yeah.
So you have to keep writing. So for instance, I am, about a week or two away from finishing a final edit on my first novel. And so once I get that out, and I actually made the mistake, the novel's about 60,000 words long. And in the world of digital publishing, that's actually like 3 novels, because what you really want to do is look at serializing, maybe breaking it up into maybe 20,000 word chunks, and and it all depends on kind of the type of book you're writing, the type of audience you're reaching out to. I have a friend, Jarrett Rush, who does a lot of that sort of shorter form serialization that he's done through Kindle as well, and it's actually worked out really well for him. So that's some of the stuff that I've been experimenting with. But that's the thing, is if you're going to be a digital publisher or self-publisher stuff, you have to be prolific. I think that people like Charles Dickens probably would have done very well in today's publishing culture. I think some of our more recent authors, someone like Juan Diaz, who has written amazing books, but they're not publishing every year. Those kind of people probably will not do as well if they were just up and coming in the digital publishing area. But someone like Charles Dickens, who is publishing, almost on a weekly, if not monthly basis, through a periodical type mindset, I think those kind of people would do a lot better in self-publishing.
What's your novel about, and what's the title, and when's it going to be available?
When's it going to be available? I'm not quite sure. I am between agents right now, and so I am looking into that. So that may tack on another 6 months or so. I'm not sure, but I hope that sometime in 2019 people will be able to read it. It may be the early 2019 if I self-publish. Maybe it'll be later 2019 if I go through some other avenue. But it is called Wear Chainmail to the Apocalypse. That is a working title because it is way too long of a title, but I tend to like these long, pretentious titles. I may need to trim that down. But Wear Chainmail to the Apocalypse. And it is, I guess the elevator pitch would be a Douglas Adams type approach to the end of the world, zombie apocalypse type story. It's got sort of the sarcastic observational narrator. It's a little bit humor, a little bit serious. The only thing I'm worried about with this particular story is because it is such a genre-heavy novel, is just that I think the zombie trend has probably been tapped out in recent years. If I had published this maybe about 2 or 3 years earlier, I think it probably would do a lot better. But you never know. Something could come along and maybe people will be interested in the genre again. But at this point, I kind of want to get it out there and then move on to the next thing. I think it's a great book. I'm really happy with it. I've had a few people that have read it already in order to get their feedback, and I've gotten some good responses to it. It seems to be, even though we're looking at probably about 60,000 words, I've had a lot of people who've read it who've zipped through it pretty quickly, and that's always, for me as a writer, I'm interested in, how quickly people read it. If they're struggling to get through it, that's a sign. But if they, are able to knock it out in an afternoon or two, then that tells me that there was something that was kind of keeping them hostage while they were reading through it. And the other thing about this novel is it does become an opportunity for me to make a few comments on society and culture. And so some of the ideas that you find in my How a TV Sitcom Triggered the Downfall of Western Civilization, there's another long title for you. Some of those ideas show up in my book as well, which, and that's something that I feel very comfortable sort of philosophizing on. And so the idea that I could put that in a work of fiction was appealing to me.
Yeah, that would be a parallel with Mark Twain. I just read this Powers biography of Mark Twain.
Oh, I love Mark Twain. Yeah.
His novels and also his commentary clearly were coming from the same voice and the same perspective.
His essay, The Lowest Animal, is one of those essays that really changed my perspective on how writing, and particularly satire, can operate. Mark Twain's always been really big for me, and hopefully the best compliment I could get is that this novel might in some way channel that Mark Twain concept of this sort of humorous look at a serious world.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes people like to say it's Mark Twain and somebody else combined. Who would be the other literary muse that you would pair if in your dream complement of the novel?
Dream complement of the novel. Well, I don't think I would get anywhere close to this, but the dream complement would probably be somewhere between Mark Twain and maybe Joan Didion. I am absolutely in love with her writing. To me, she might be one of the greatest voices of this lifetime. Reading Slouching Toward Bethlehem and all of her work, just some great stuff. But once again, that's a high bar to aspire to. I'm a comic book writer at heart, so there's plenty of people in the comic book field. Robert Kirkman might come to mind as well.
Your tips on retaining sanity: read books, learn things, don't buy so much stuff. Let's go to the kind of consumer culture point that you make in the essay, because I have to ask: are you a member of Amazon Prime, and are you going to be buying lots of stuff in this holiday season?
I am. And it is funny because, Amazon Prime is a big part of consumer culture. But the funny thing is, I actually think that Amazon Prime helps me reduce the impulse purchases. Because when I go to the mall, because I have an inkling of what I want. And then when I'm there, I leave with maybe 4 or 5 things, and maybe only one of those things I only half wanted. It's a weird routine. I know that a lot of people like sort of shopping as a form of combat, where they can go and fight for the sales and they can hunt. And there's this very sort of primal idea of hunting and finding it and dragging it back to your cave. But the great thing about Amazon Prime is you can avoid all of that and simply go to what you want, get it, and then you're done. But the other thing I like, and this is why I've been using it for the past couple of years, is I have family that live in different parts of the world, different parts of the country, and I don't know if you've paid UPS or FedEx recently to ship a package, but it is really expensive. And so the idea of being able to ship those presents directly to them, gosh, it's probably saved me a good $100+ every year just using that. So it's hard to argue. Even prices go up, prices go down, but you can't argue with the shipping being at least one of the draws. So I've used that a lot, and I still hold on to this idea that idiot culture and consumer culture are very closely linked. And this is coming from someone who works in marketing. But, what we don't want to be is unconscious consumers. And I think that it's not that buying things is bad, it's that buying things without thinking is bad, where we just sort of consume, and we're not thinking, do I need this? Can I afford this? Is this something, that adds to me, or is this just one more thing to throw on the pile? And so I think becoming a little bit more mindful about how we shop, I think that's important. And so, when you're at the mall and everything's bright and shiny and loud, it can oftentimes be hard to really sort of, look at the thing that is there before you and say, is this actually something that I want? Or would my life be easier if I just had less stuff? Kind of cluttering everything up.
How about Alexa? Have you got any Alexa devices, and do you think that's adds to sanity or pushes us more toward idiot culture?
I don't know. I have not used Alexa. I've been eyeing it, but I haven't used it yet. The closest I get is with my smartphone. I find that just simply asking it to help me get home or find the fastest route home has been kind of the extent of that. I am interested and intrigued by this idea of technology that is sort of anticipating what you want. So it knows that if you ask for the same thing on a pretty regular basis, it can safely assume that that's what you want. And I don't know. I'm curious to see what the future brings with that kind of technology, because on one hand, it's nice. You think about the days when the milk would arrive in the morning. There was this sort of expectation that this is what I'm looking for every day. And for me, I have a subscription to the New York Times. Every morning, it arrives in my inbox, the newsletter, which gives me the highlights for the day. And so I don't know if Alexa is that different from that. It's anticipating needs, and it's providing those things for me when I want them. Where we get into concerns is, and I'm sure you've had experiences like this too, when all of a sudden you get advertising that is directly crafted to something you were thinking about, and then it just sort of pops up on, in particular, I remember that the day after my daughter was born, we started getting diaper ads on Hulu.
Oh boy.
And I'm almost certain it was because on Facebook we posted the announcement of our daughter's birth. Well, Facebook sells that information, knowing that our email links our Facebook to our Hulu account. There's some algorithm there that would tell us, oh, they just had a kid, it's time for the diaper ads. So all the cool car commercials left Hulu, and now I get the diaper ads. So
that's a little ominous.
It is. And, on one level, and this is someone who works in marketing, I could say it's a good thing for you to get advertised the things that you actually want. The bad part of that is, how do we extend this to, say, information? If we know that I am a left-leaning individual, are you only going to give me articles that reinforce what I already think? Because now you can now create an entire culture where I am more or less sheltered from conflicting ideas. And that can't be healthy. So when it comes to buying diapers, I don't mind getting the Pampers commercial. But when it comes to the marketplace of ideas, I do worry that, is there valid conservative thought that I am missing out on because Facebook assumed that I didn't want it? And that's the thing I worry about.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, we started out with friends and the interesting ideas that you drew from that in your essay. If you were going to, this would be, if we were at a party, we might be having this conversation, but if you were going to pick one of the shows that you're watching on Netflix or HBO or somewhere else that is kind of pushing in the opposite direction, that's giving people a more positive role model for nuanced thought, intellectual pursuits, what's kind of the most inspiring program that helps make the case for nerds that you're enjoying?
That's a good question. I've had a lot of people tell me, I haven't watched the show, but Big Bang Theory, a lot of people have been saying that is the solution to my problem. And I don't know. It seems to be kind of another one of those typical comedies that follows the typical comedy beats. So when I'm thinking about stuff that really kind of breaks the rules, does different things, I'm actually a really big fan of Lena Dunham's work, Girls, and then more recently Camping. I think that she has, much like Mark Twain, a very wry sort of commentary on her own generation, but on culture in general. She's not for everyone, but I'm still stuck on the season finale or the series finale of Girls. I thought that was probably just one of the smartest final episodes of a TV show I've ever seen. I've always liked Freaks and Geeks. I thought that the work of Judd Apatow and Paul Feig was really, really good on that show. And I think that, where television really, I think, does its best work is when it sort of communicates these complex ideas of community in a way that is meaningful. And I'll even go so far as to say Rick and Morty is a really intelligent show. I mean, it's kind of a juvenile cartoon, much like South Park, but I find that some of the philosophical ideas that are presented on that show are pretty profound when you move past the adolescent humor.
Great list. That gives me some things to check out, but I'm going to wait until I finish the Friends series before I move on to the new stuff. I have been speaking with David Hopkins, author of We Miss All the Great Parties, and a terrific essay titled How a TV Sitcom Triggered the Downfall of Western Civilization. Thanks very much, David.
Thank you.
Let's finish up now with more of your Ask Me Anything questions and observations. John Aga wrote, I wanted to share with you an interesting twist of a book. I have noticed publicity for this book, the one that he recommended. The title is When Books Went to War, The Stories That Helped Us Win World War II by Molly Guptill Manning. It's published 4 years ago by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. John wrote that the book is, quote, a history about how a U.S. government reading program contributed to winning World War II. This does look like an intriguing book. The reading program was called Armed Services Editions, which distributed 120 million small lightweight paperbacks for troops to carry in their pockets and rucksacks in every theater of war. I didn't realize that the program was inspired by a campaign by librarians earlier who were outraged by an enemy that had banned and burned 100 million books. They gathered 20 million hardcover book donations that were sent free to American troops. And then that led to the program by the Army Department. Entertainment Weekly wrote of When Books Went to War, whether or not you're a book lover, you'll be moved. John also recommended a podcast that I have listened to before. I enjoy quite a bit. It's titled A Teacher's History of the United States. I'll have a link to the episode that John referred to. It's titled Gobble Gobble, What's the Deal with Thanksgiving? This is a myth-busting review of the history of Thanksgiving, and it contains, for me, the shocking revelation that the first Thanksgiving probably took place in Virginia, not Massachusetts. Who knew? Among the AMA emails I received was a surprising one from Mark Roberts of Dallas, who, after considerable hesitation and resistance to Alexa, has gone all in with the Home Assistant. On Cyber Monday, he ordered 2 Echo Dots on sale for $20 each, a smart plug, and the Fire Stick that works with Alexa. He writes, I'm wondering how many others are getting new Alexa devices today or for Christmas. Mark suggested that I do a show about setting up Echo devices for newbies. I think it's a great idea. I have been on the Alexa bandwagon right from the start, but I will admit it's tough to stay up to date with all the new capabilities. And, it's still sort of a sidelight to Kindle and reading, but it is all things Amazon. As an example, I read that Alexa will be able to hear a whispered command and reply with a whisper. I thought this was going to be up and running by October, but I just tried it on an Echo here at the cottage, and it just didn't seem to work. If you've been whispering to your Alexa at night in order to let your partner sleep, please let me know how you did it. It sounds cool because you whisper, and then she whispers back to you. So how do they do that? That's amazing. The key tool for setting up Echo devices that I found is the Alexa app on your smartphone. You can also configure devices from your computer at alexa.amazon.com, but it seems easier to me to just use the app on my iPhone. I have 23 devices listed under settings on my Alexa app. That includes Fire TV devices, Echoes, a Tap, some in Cambridge, some in Denver, and several Fire HD tablets. It's all a little dizzying. But I can go into any one of them and change things like the location so that it's got the right place to talk to the weather about. And there's other settings. There's one that enables you to ask follow-up questions. So if you ask Alexa, what's the weather, she'll say what it is. And then as the blue ring is still going around, you can add a quick one without saying her name, like what's the weather in Old Orchard Beach, if you want to follow up. If you have questions about setting up Alexa devices or using them, maybe you could email them to me at podchronicles@gmail.com. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of new Alexa homes by the end of this year, so sometime in January it might be a good time for a deep dive into the topic. Mark Jarvis emailed from London with a good question. Why on my Kindle Oasis, new generation, is it not possible to benefit from immersive reading? Could this be remedied by a future software update? Mark, I think the answer involves how quickly the e-ink screen can refresh itself. Immersive reading, I think, is a great feature of reading a Kindle book on a tablet or a smartphone. The words on the book are highlighted as they are read by the professional narrator in Audible. Since the Paperwhite and Oasis now have Bluetooth audio capability, so you can hook them up to speakers or headphones, it would be a natural improvement to give them access to the immersive reading, as long as the e-ink could keep up with it. Mark had a second question. Could Audible be switched to a rental model? I have nearly 700 titles in my library, most of which I am unlikely to listen to again. That seems like a good idea to me as well. Maybe something like Kindle Unlimited, but for Audible books that you could have 5 at a time on loan and then move the new books in as you finish the old ones. Good idea. Guven Vidovine wrote from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Hi, Len. Not urgent or uppermost in TKC followers, perhaps, but if you have room. Question: how does ebook reading and publishing compare in North America compared to other parts of the world you know of? This question is about both the experiential, cultural, and the economic market perspective. No doubt your Amazon or Forrester contacts will have some quantitative comparisons, but for the user experience, probably your own observations and anecdotes will be most useful, I am guessing. Well, Guven, I confess I have little personal experience on this topic. I have used Kindle in some of our travels to the Galapagos and Africa, but it's not really the same as experiencing how ebooks are being experienced in different languages and cultures. I'm going to be on the lookout for a guest from Amazon or somewhere else who might be able to help us dig into that. That's a good suggestion. Mark Batson emailed from Colorado. Hello, Len. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope all is well in your family, especially your mother is in good health. Just a note to let you know, we stopped by the Amazon 4-star store at the Park Meadows Mall last week. I liked the experience because it had such a broad cross-section of items. We bought a few items and checkout was easy. Stepped up to the counter with a tablet facing me. I signed in to my Amazon account and checked out. I'm sorry I didn't check to see what the tablet was. We bought a set of whisks, coasters, Harry Potter-themed key ring, and an electric toothbrush, all gifts. I signed into my Amazon account just now to review these items, and under previous orders, you can select a filter item order type called Amazon Stores. Amazon just keeps getting better at removing barriers to separating me from my money. Happy Thanksgiving and Merry Christmas, Max Baston, Castle Rock, Colorado. That's just south of Denver. Thanks for that report from the 4-star store, Max. As I mentioned last week, I made my own visit to the Park Meadows store when we were briefly in Denver last week. I liked your eclectic list of items that you purchased, especially the whisks. One thing I forgot to mention last week is someone in the store said that Park Meadows Mall store originally had been planned to be a bookstore, but then when the 4-star stores were rolled out with a much broader range of merchandise, they switched it. So instead of being a bookstore, it's a 4-star store. Mike Isaro creator of the Highlighter blog and podcast, wrote, "Hi, Len. You know how some people think that the Oasis 2 has an inferior battery, especially compared with the Paperwhite? I thought the same thing, except over the last 3 to 6 months, I've noticed that my battery life is improving. Is this possible? Anyway, I know that you have an Oasis 2, so I wanted to see if I'm crazy. I likely am. Hope you're doing well." That's an interesting observation, Mark. I used to be more mindful of the battery life of my Kindle and Fire devices, but it seems that in recent years I've settled into a pattern of simply topping off the charge whenever it gets to about half depleted. I have charging cables at my bedside and in my den, so it's easy to charge everything. That means I just haven't noticed a change in the battery life of my Oasis. It wouldn't surprise me to learn that Amazon's engineers did figure out a way to increase the battery life with a software update, so I'm glad you told us about it. That's it for this week. As I said, Tom Abrahams will be here next week unless he gets sent off to another big story. I found the coverage of George H.W. Bush's funeral to be moving, and Kennebunk is 10 miles south of Ocean Park here, so in parts of the year he was nearly a neighbor. This is Len Edgerly in Ocean Park, Maine for the Kindle Chronicles. Thanks for listening.